All right, everybody in attendance. My name is Dan Milnor. I am Blurb's creative evangelist. You probably have seen my face before. I just want to take a few minutes here up front to do a little housekeeping and also to make sure that technically we're not having any issues. So if you guys can do me a favor and just go into that chat box and send me a message and let me know that you are out there, that you can hear us. And also ping in with where you are calling in from. I always love asking this because the range is typically pretty astounding. Atlanta, all right, first one to check in is Atlanta, not bad. Who else is out there? Portland, Maine, thanks for differentiating. In Southern California, when you say Portland, it's always Portland, Oregon, and then people say, wait a minute, I didn't even know there was a Portland, Maine, but I will be there in about a week, so I love Portland, Maine. Zurich, Orinda, Phoenix, Nice, France, Bristol, England, Edmonton, Alberta, Balboa Island. Hey, Mary, you and I are very close. The Bay Area, London, Martha's Vineyard. Wow, you guys live in great places. Augusta, Georgia, Hernando in Florida, Czech Republic, Greece. It is like a meeting of the United Nations on this particular webinar. That's a pretty astounding thing. This is, I think, one of the best things about the internet. So, a couple of housekeeping things up front, and thank you for texting in and letting me know where you're coming from. Boston, it just checked in. A couple of things, you can comment as an attendee just like you're doing right now. So if you have questions that are pertaining to Kickstarter or getting your book off the ground, which is the title of today's webinar, which is self-publishing with Blurb and Kickstarter, getting your book off the ground. If you have questions that are pertaining to this, make sure that you write them into the chat on the right. And remember, if you're looking for questions about like summer fashion trends and power tools, you're on the wrong webinar. This is about Kickstarter and Blurb and books. So let's try to keep the questions in that genre. We have two wonderful speakers for you today. We have so much information to go over that they are going to share with you. I'm excited because I, as a Blurb employee, get asked these questions all the time. The first of our speakers is Margot Atwell, which maybe there we go, waving with the on the right there. At least it's on my right. And Margot's the director of publishing and comics at Kickstarter, and she knows more about the platform than you and I will ever know. So she's got a wonderful presentation to give us first, and then secondly, we're going to check in with Meg Smiley there on the left. And Meg is a graphic designer and an illustrator who always wanted to do a children's book. And luckily for all of us, she actually did do this children's book, and she did it with the help of Kickstarter. So she's going to walk you through her process and what she learned and the things that surprised her and maybe some of the things that she would do differently in the future. So we are going to kick this off with Margot. Meg and I are both going to turn our cameras off, and you're going to see Margot's presentation that we're going to scroll through. And then I will be back when Margot's presentation is complete, and we'll introduce Meg and move on. So again, if you've got questions, make sure to send them in. Let me start sharing a presentation here, and you should be able to see this. Margot, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
All righty, I'm gonna turn off my microphone, which will make everyone happy. Not my microphone, my camera and my microphone. And so we will go over here. If you need anything, I will be right here. So I'll turn it over to Margot. Thanks, Margot.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm really excited to be here talking to all of you about using Kickstarter to get your book projects off the ground. So I think below me, you can see a slideshow, which I will be referring to, and Dan will be advancing the slides for me. So go ahead, Dan.
Hang on here. There we go.
So as Dan mentioned, I'm the director of publishing comics at Kickstarter. I've worked here for 4 years. And in addition to working for Kickstarter, I'm also a prolific backer. I've backed almost 400 projects across the site, many of them book projects. I'm also a creator. I've run 2 projects to fund books on Kickstarter. So I've definitely been in your shoes, and I understand how scary and exciting and ultimately really thrilling running a Kickstarter project can be. Go ahead. So some very, very basic facts about Kickstarter. We've been around since 2009. In 2015, we reincorporated as a public benefit corporation, which means that we are contractually required to be a mission-driven company. It's in our corporate charter that our mission is to help bring creative projects to life. That's a pretty cool thing that allows us a lot of flexibility to help and support creators. The publishing category on Kickstarter is extremely diverse. There are 17 subcategories under the publishing category, including children's books, fiction, radio and podcasts, poetry, zines, and more. A couple more stats and facts about Kickstarter publishing. In the 9 years since we were founded, we've had almost 13,000 successful publishing projects. That represents $140 million pledged and about 1.6 million backers in the publishing category alone. Across Kickstarter, it's about 14 million backers. Our backers are people from all around the world. We've had a backer, at least one backer, sometimes many, from almost every country in the entire world. We even have a prolific backer up in Antarctica. So the fundamental premise of Kickstarter is that it's a platform that lets you create something to share with others. And that something can be a book, a game, a podcast, an event, a book tour. The sky's really the limit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Kickstarter works and how to structure your project. This is just a quick overview of the components of a good project. You want to introduce yourself, tell the story of your project, create a beautiful page, offer great rewards, and build a relationship with your backers. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these stages and what I mean by these things. So when people come to pledge to a Kickstarter project, they're not just looking for a cool thing to read. They want to get excited about what you're doing. So it's important for you to talk about who you are, what your background is. Have you done a project like this before? If it's a children's book that you're illustrating, what kind of art have you done in the past? What's your familiarity with bookmaking? What research have you done? And I think even bigger than that is, why is this project important to you? Because people want to help someone make their dreams come true. And so if you talk about why the project is important to you, they might find that actually it's important to them as well. So Kickstarter is a great platform for creating context around what you're making. We ask creators to think about their project as a story. So you want to talk about what you're making, why you're making it. As I mentioned before, if you've ever made anything similar, where you are in the process. You should really spend some time thinking about how you're going to produce the book, what steps are in the process, how will you deliver the rewards to people, do you need an editor, do you need an illustrator, a cover designer, how much will all of that cost? So the more work you've done before you launch your Kickstarter project and the more you convey that in the page, the more confident people will be about your ability to do what you say you're going to do. You also want to talk about, what will the project look like when it's done? You know, is it a hardcover book? Is it a paperback book? Is it big or small? How many pages is it, etc. And ultimately, you also want to convey to backers, why will they enjoy this? Not just why it's important to you, but also why it will be exciting for a backer. The internet is an extremely visual medium. So Kickstarter has a lot of different visual elements that you can add to your project to help make it more compelling to people. The first of these is the project video. It's not required to have a video to launch a project, but we see that projects that have videos have a much higher success rate than those without. And you don't have to get fancy with it. You don't have to direct the next Hollywood blockbuster movie. You can honestly use your laptop or your cell phone flipped sideways, just like this. You want to make sure that your sound quality is good, that you have a good clear picture like this, and then speak from the heart. Tell people why you're doing this and what will make it exciting to them. Other things to add, you want to add images, GIFs, links, and other things to support the fact that this will be a very cool project. You can share excerpts from your book, sample photographs or illustrations, and more. You also want to make the main project image a really great one. The project image is kind of the face of your project on Kickstarter and on social media and elsewhere. So you want to make sure that it really resonates with people and is a high resolution image that fits within the format of Kickstarter's image selection. You also want to make sure that the page is formatted attractively. So you can use headers, bullets, etc., to help backers understand what you're saying and move through the flow of the page. Another really critical aspect of a Kickstarter project is offering rewards. You set your goal, you say, if I can raise $10,000, then I'll make this book. And then in exchange for the pledges, backers get rewards. So very often, the backer just wants a copy of the thing you're making, either a digital book, a print book, or some other version of it. However, you can also get creative and offer limited edition rewards, cool experiences, and other things. Sometimes if you're an illustrator or a creative person out in the world and there's something that people are always asking you for that you've never done before, like merchandise or prints or something like that, a Kickstarter campaign can be a really good opportunity to make those things. And then you know that you'll have a built-in audience that's excited for those things once you launch them. I also personally love digital rewards because there's no fulfillment cost. So you just create it, email it to your backers, and then it's very, very simple and easy, and you don't have to go to the post office. A couple notes about rewards. You really want to make sure that you've thought about the production costs of rewards and the shipping costs. I think shipping costs are one of the areas where creators get into the biggest amount of trouble. So I would actually take a physical object that's about the size and weight of what you expect to be sending, take it to the post office, find out how much it will cost to send domestically and internationally, and then really make sure you've accounted for those costs in the project. Because you don't want to find a situation where you raise enough money to make the thing, but then you haven't factored in enough money to send the thing to the people who pledge for it. So rewards pricing is a big question mark for a lot of people. We see that people on Kickstarter are a little less price sensitive than they are on other places on the internet. They're not looking for the best deal. They just want to pledge an amount of money that feels reasonable for a reward and to help you make the thing that you're making. We see that the most common pledge level on Kickstarter is $25. So people will often put the book, the physical book they're making at between $20 and $30. The tier that raises the most money is very often $100. There's something kind of nice and round about that number that makes people want to pledge to it. So it's really good to have an excellent reward at that $100 level. You also want to think about the different price points that people might pledge at. If you have a lot of fans who are younger or have are a little bit more strapped for resources, you might want to offer more lower tier rewards. But if you think that there are people who might pledge a higher amount, you could offer a specialized reward at $200 or a unique experience at $500 or more. You just want to make sure that each of these rewards is something that you could see someone pledging to. So Kickstarter is often called a crowdfunding site, but I think that thinking about it as a crowd is kind of a misnomer. Kickstarter is a way that you can reach out through the internet and speak individually to tons of different people who all might be excited about your project. But I really think about it as a relationship building platform, not just a crowdfunding platform. Your backers aren't just giving you money, they're also giving you enthusiasm for your project. They're a vote of confidence. They're going to follow along the process the whole time that you're making this thing. And they're going to be cheering you on as you send out their rewards to them and achieve success with it. So if you can think about it as not sending backer updates to the crowd, but sending an update to all of the new friends who have joined you to help you make this thing, that can be kind of cool. I mentioned backer updates. Once your project is live and people start backing it, you can send updates, which both go out through email and live on the site. You can send private updates that are only for backers. but you can also send public updates. And that's a cool way to give people who might back the project more of a sense of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the project in progress. You can actually grab those backer updates and share them on social media as well. Great rewards can also help you build a relationship with your backers. For example, I offered a reward at the $100 level for one of my projects where the backer got early access to my manuscript before it was published, and they acted as beta readers for me. I actually had quite a number of beta readers, people who did read the early manuscript, and a couple of them gave me really good feedback that I ended up integrating into the final book. So they literally became part of the project, which was really cool. You also want to make sure that you continue to stay in touch with people on occasion after the project is over, because these are people who really care about the work you're doing. So if you do new things in the future, you might want to let them know about it. This community that you built is not just a one-time thing. They're with you for the long haul. And if you really work in investing in this community, it can be a source of support and enthusiasm for your whole creative career. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of children's book projects that we've seen on Kickstarter. I like the idea of Blurb for children's books because obviously Blurb does really lovely color books and can do hardcovers, paperbacks, etc. I think that there are a lot of print-on-demand solutions that are a little less good for illustrated books and children's books. So this lovely thing is Hello Ruby. There's a programmer who wanted to create a book about programming for kids. And so she created this book about this little girl who has all these friends, these imaginary friends, and she communicates with them in the secret language, which is coding. She came to Kickstarter looking to raise $10,000 and ended up raising almost $400,000 from over 9,000 backers. She ended up publishing this in a wider audience, to a wider audience with a mainstream publisher as well. This is another fun project. This creator wanted to make a children's book that helped get kids interested in languages other than English. So they published a book, I think it was a digital book that starts in English and then ends in a different language. And the parents could actually change how much of a percentage of other languages were in the book. So I think that this was a really neat project, and obviously almost 1,300 backers agreed with me. This is a lovely illustrated book that's an adaptation of Darwin's On the Origin of Species, meant for kids. Obviously, like, the illustrations are darling, and people were really excited about it. I think this was the creator's first Kickstarter project, but I expect to see them back since this one worked so well. So before you run your Kickstarter project, I'd really encourage you to explore the publishing category and whatever subcategory relates specifically to your project. See what people have done that you like, and then adapt that for your own purposes. You can also learn more about planning, launching, and running a Kickstarter project at the URL below. And I'll send out, or see if we can get Blurb to send out the handout afterwards. But it's creators.kickstarter.com/publishing-tools-and-resources/. That just rolls right off the tongue. So thank you so much for joining me. And now I'm going to turn over the platform to Meg. So she's going to tell you more about her project.
Wait 1 second here. Let me close this, stop the slideshow. And okay, so the two of us here, Meg is gonna come back on here in a second. Margot, just one quick question. John wrote in and asked about an example of a digital reward, which is something that I jotted down in my notes as well that I wanted to ask you. That is such a monumentally smart thing to do, but can you give us an example of what a digital reward would be?
Sure. It could be an ebook. It could be giving the backer a chance to Skype with you or have you Skype into their book club. Sometimes people will do reading lists, 10 amazing books that I recommend or that inspired this book that I'm making. you can get really creative with it. And I think it really depends on what the project is and what your background is, what makes a really good digital reward. But an ebook copy or PDF copy is kind of a no-brainer for a lot of projects.
That is that's fantastic. So I'm not seeing Meg here quite yet, but hopefully, Meg, if you are here, you can turn your camera on and we can transition. There we go. We can transition to her. So just to give Margot, thank you so much for that presentation. We're going to come back at the end with some questions. I have a whole list here, and people have been writing in as well. And let's turn it over to Meg now. And again, just for the attendees out there, Meg's a graphic designer and an illustrator who dreamt of doing a book, and fortunately for all of us, she didn't just dream it, she went out and did it. And she has a pretty incredible little background story here to how she put this together. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her. I'm going to turn my camera off and my audio off, but I will be back here when Meg is done. So Meg, thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. Well, as Dan said, I am Meg Smiley. That is my real name. Perfect for a children's book author. And I am a graphic designer and an illustrator who always dreamt of doing this. So really, it has been a dream come true. So I wrote and illustrated Animals Under the Bed. This is my very first self-publishing attempt ever. So I'm excited to share with you about all of the things that I learned, because I know it can be kind of a daunting task when you're doing it for the first time, but really you can do it. So first of all, I'll just share how I got started on this book. I joined a social media challenge called the 100 Days Project. So if you go on Instagram and look up hashtag 100 Days Project, you will see tons of creatives posting things that they've done. And the challenge is to do something creative every day for 100 days in a row. So I decided to use it as a way to kind of do some stress relief from work. And I took up painting. I started painting animals and discovered that I just love painting these whimsical, crazy animals that are all kinds of colors and have like their own kind of unique character to them. And as I was doing these paintings, I was posting them to social media. People were following me more and more, getting really excited, and I just knew I had to make it into a kid's book, the kid's book I always wanted. So that's where this project started for me. And I'm just going to share the steps that I took to get where I am, because a lot of people ask me, where do you even start? So the first step for me was to finish my paintings. Since I started painting, I wanted to get the animals done first. You may start by writing, and that's obviously fine too. But the painting for me inspired the writing. So I finished them, I scanned them onto the computer, I edited them in Photoshop, and then I brought them into InDesign to design the pages and start writing. So during this creation process, I learned many things, and I have some tips for you guys. First of all, I would say that sharing the creative process on social media before your book is finished is hugely helpful for marketing. I kind of learned this by accident because the 100 Days Project requires you to share your progress every day. But what happened is people were so excited about my animals that by the time I was finished painting them, they were already asking me when my book was going to come out. I didn't have to do a lot of marketing because they had been invested in the project the whole time. So I would definitely suggest that. The next thing is that if I were you, this is not something I did. It's something I would do differently next time. Look into book standard printing sizes. So I started painting on square pages just because that's what I had. and was not thinking about the cost of printing a book at a square size. So if you are specifically worried about cost and getting your book out to as many people as possible for really cheap, you might want to look into standard printing sizes before you start illustrating, because 8 by 10 sizes, for example, are cheaper than square sizes in almost any book printer. The next tip I would tell you is to make sure and do your research on, look up kids book trending topics. I kind of lucked out because my subject, animals, was actually already trending at the time, but I didn't know that until I started looking into it. So if you are kind of going between, you know, mermaids and insects, or you have a couple ideas, start researching now what things are already selling. And one more tip I have for you in this process is to figure out before you start writing the age group that you are writing for. This is especially important with kids' books, because the first question you'll get once you're selling your book from parents is how old, like what is the age range for this book? Because my kids, you know, are this age range and reading level, and I don't want this to be too simple or too difficult for them. And there are lots of free resources online. All you have to do is just Google kids book genres. You can find the word count that you need, the page count, and the difficulty of the words. So that really depends on what age range you're targeting. So the next step after my book was created was really to look into self-publishing services. This part, I think, is probably the most, one of the most daunting for creators, because all you've been thinking about is just making this perfect book. And there are so many self-publishing resources out there to choose from. So what I would recommend starting with is making a list of the things that are important to you about your book. So there is no like clear right answer to any of this stuff, but if you can make a list and say, I really care about the illustrations in my book, so I want to showcase them the most, which means I might need a really high quality book, then that's really important to you, and that's going to help you determine which self-publishing service to use. So that segues into why I used Blurb, because I really wanted a high quality book to showcase all of my paintings. I spent so much time and energy on these paintings that I couldn't imagine sacrificing the quality at all. I wanted you to be able to see all the little details and brush strokes that went into them. So I fell in love with Blurb's photo book option. And I also really loved that Blurb does volume printing, so that I could bring the price of the photo books down by printing in bulk. So that was one main reason I went with Blurb, but there were several other things that really drew me to them. One was they have designer-friendly plugins. So as a designer, I am most familiar with Adobe InDesign, Photoshop, all of those programs. And I didn't want to have to use someone else's software to design my book. I wanted my workflow to stay the same. Blurb has an Adobe InDesign plugin that you can just download and pull up in InDesign. You specify the page number, you specify the paper type, and you know that it will print perfectly with Blurb that way. Another thing I loved was I already mentioned this, but their volume printing abilities, because I didn't really want a cheaper book. This was like my baby, and I wanted it to be just really nice. So I wanted to print in volume to save on cost. I also love that they have tons of print and distribution options. When you go on Blurb's website, you'll see that they are they have listed like Amazon CreateSpace, Ingram Spark, and Kickstarter that they work with. So I didn't have to worry about going to Blurb and saying, can you print this? But now, like, do you work well with others? You know, how do I get this distributed? So that was really good for me. And I really honestly just love the quality of Blurb's proof that I got from them. So when I got my photo book proof from Blurb, I compared it to other places and it just blew me away. I fell in love with it. I wanted it to showcase my work. So the next step after I decided on Blurb for self-publishing was for me to email their large order services to figure out how small of a bulk order I could place to reduce the cost of my photo books for my customers. So I was really pleased that their bulk orders start at 100 books because to me that seemed pretty attainable. And after I figured out the number, I emailed them to figure out, okay, the exact cost of each book depends on, you know, the page count, the paper type. So I just figured out with them how long my book could be and what paper I would use to keep it at a certain cost. So those were all really helpful tools for me. One more thing that the large order services team did with me was to help me with drop shipping to my customers. So you can probably see behind me, but I live in a 250 square foot apartment, studio apartment in New York. And I knew that I did not have a lot of room for storing hundreds of books and then shipping them out to people. So I was very pleased that they offer drop shipping for bulk orders. All I had to do was provide them with the addresses and the number of books that each customer wanted, and they were more than willing to do it for me. So all of those things made Blurb a great choice for me. And my next step actually was to develop marketing, some more marketing for my book and my Kickstarter campaign. So since I went with a large volume order, I knew I needed to fundraise for it. So what I did first was honestly just go on Facebook and Instagram and ask people, like, how many books would you buy? Are you interested in this book? And I actually hadn't finished writing the book quite yet. I just wanted to see, basically, I wanted to know before I finished writing how many people will buy this because I want to make sure it's worth the effort. So I just started counting. People were like, oh, I'd buy one, I'd buy two, I could see buying this as a gift. And I told them like a general price range so that they know how much it would be. But as soon as I had 100 yeses, I just wrote that down and started planning my Kickstarter because all I needed was 100 to reach my minimum goal. So whether you're using a Kickstarter or not, I have some tips for you in marketing and campaigning your book. The first one would be that you should look up other campaigns, either on Kickstarter campaigns to see how they were successful, or just in general, look up other self-published authors to see what they did. I was able to find some really helpful blogs and things that are kind of like this webinar, just saying, you know, this is what I learned. These are the things I would do differently. These are the some secrets I have for you. And it was really helpful to know, like, this person has been there and this is what they did. I also looked up some free tutorials online to make a video. So as Margot is saying, it is actually so much more captivating for people to watch a video about your book than just to read about it. It's something that people want to share more on social media. You know, it's just like how, you know, we'd rather watch a trailer for a movie than read something because it resonates with us. So I actually looked up tutorials on how to create an animated video with Adobe Flash, which was a little out of my comfort zone at the time. But because it was for me and for my project, it was actually really fun to learn. So I did like a very short animated video showcasing my animals and the paintings. And I didn't have to spend any money on videographers or anything else. I just learned how to do it myself. So I would encourage you that if I can learn how to do all of these things on my own, you really can too. I didn't have any money or any resources besides the internet and Blurb and Kickstarter. So that was really great. I also, Margot already touched on this too, but figure out your shipping costs and factor them in to the cost of the books. Those things really add up at the end. And one more thing that I did was I created a website later on to showcase my book. So this can be, you do not have to be a web designer to do this. I used Squarespace. You could also use Wix or WordPress, but you just want some kind of a landing page for your customers to go to read about your book and to read, you know, how you got started, why it's important to you. A lot of the things that you would share in like a Kickstarter campaign. You just want people to know what this book means to you and why it's important, why they should buy it. So those are all the things I did to market. I also have some surprises that came up along the way. Many of these are good surprises. So one of them was that when I went to USPS to ship my books, I discovered that you can actually save a lot of money on shipping by shipping books as media mail. Media mail includes anything deemed as like educational materials. So I know it includes videos and books, and I think there are some other things too, but that was hugely helpful for me. I actually still ship my books as media mail because it saves so much money. Another thing was that you can get free shipping supplies and very cheap shipping supplies online in bulk. So the free shipping supplies I've found are actually priority mail shipping through USPS. I didn't use them because I did media mail, but if you're set on priority mail, you can actually get all of those for free just by going online, which is pretty awesome. Another thing is I found bulk shipping supply companies like Uline, Uline. You can order bulk shipping supplies from them for so much cheaper than if you went to Staples and just tried to buy like a ton of things. I also was surprised when I first went to the post office. This is like, I was a total newbie. I did not pick out shipping supplies ahead of time. I had 50 books with me and I had all these addresses, and I ended up spending 2 to 3 hours in the post office writing the addresses out because I just didn't think ahead. So that is not a good surprise to have. That was a little bit embarrassing, and the person working at the front desk there was new, so I think I was kind of a headache for her. So definitely do that ahead of time. Go to the post office with, like Margot said, something of the same size or with one of your books, and just test something out to see how it works first. And then I had some really awesome surprises. So one of them was that Kickstarter made my book a project we love. It's something that boosts your book's visibility on their website. And I ended up shipping to over 10 different countries, which I never expected. It was so cool. I met so many people. So that was really, really fun. That was such a great surprise. And I'm so thankful that they did that. I just had more support than I expected from my followers. You'd be surprised how many people want to back a personal project like this. They want to be able to have something that you created in their hands because it's not the same as just buying anything. The biggest surprise for me was that my book actually gained so much momentum during the Kickstarter that after it was over, I ended up with over 100 people who still wanted copies of my book. So at the time I had some figuring out to do, but it was a good problem to have because I had so much interest built up. So what happened is I eventually started a small business from this book. I now sell prints and merchandise that go along with the book. I sell signed copies. I've figured out how to store and distribute them. So really, you never know what a project like this can turn into when you put your heart into it. So that is really the gist of my story. I think we're going to open it up now for questions.
We are back, so hopefully we can have all three of us here with our cameras shining and showing our bright, shiny faces. So there are a bunch of questions here I have for each of you. But Meg, you said something that I'm hoping, just as another creative person, that you misspoke, because otherwise I'm going to be so insanely jealous. At the very beginning of this, you said that, is it true that you just started painting and this book of it is the first body of work that you painted?
So, okay, so here's the full story. I have been drawing and sketching since I was like tiny kid. Okay. So I've been artistic my whole life. I love art. I just had started painting with acrylic for the first time though. I was teaching myself how to use, that was kind of my, for that social media challenge, that's what I wanted to do, was learn acrylic. And so really that, I kind of misspoke a little bit. I hadn't just started completely fresh.
Luckily, I was like, that's it. I quit. I'm giving up. If she can do this right off the bat, I'm going to be jealous. Meg, another question for you. This is from Juliana, and it was I had the same question written down in my notes, which is, from the first moment that you had a thought of doing this book until the books were being drop shipped, what kind of time frame are we talking about?
Oh, that's a very good question. Let's see. Well, that's kind of a tricky one because I actually, there was some time between when I finished the paintings and when I actually decided to make the book. I knew I wanted to make the book when I was doing the paintings, but my husband and I were just about to move to New York and he was in school. And so I finished the paintings. I was thinking like, I've got to make a book. And then we moved. I started a new job. So it was actually about a year and a half after I finished those that I was like, okay, I'm making the book now.
Okay. So basically a year and a half once you had the seed of the book and idea in mind, it was a year and a half before shipping, which I think is a really interesting point, because I think a lot of times people get confused on the timeline, whether they're working with a traditional publisher, which is typically a 12 to 18 month time frame. And then, a self-published book you can do if you were just doing a simple one-off book, you could do it in a very short amount of time. But what I loved about your presentation was that it painted this picture of really the complexity of an entire campaign around the idea of putting this thing out, and in which Kickstarter is a major component of, and Blurb ended up being a component of. But it was really interesting to see that there is so much complexity to the idea of putting something like this out, but you managed to pull it off.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. And I knew when I started the book, working on the book again, I didn't want to wait too long because I didn't want people to forget about my animals from the year before. Because it was like, what ended up happening is I posted, I was like, hey, do you guys remember those animals from last summer? I'm making the book now. So yeah, so that was definitely part of it. But if I had wanted to, I could have just gone ahead and started making it immediately if I wasn't like moving and all this stuff. And I mean, by the time that I had the Kickstarter rolling and, you know, was almost ready to start shipping, it was only a couple, 2 or 3 months really. After I said, I'm making it now.
Yeah, when you were committed then.
Yeah.
Margot, I have a 2-part question for you,
Sure.
which is based on something you said earlier, which I'm very curious about, which is when you said to go online and research what has been done on Kickstarter in maybe the genre that you're working in. Has anything been done similarly before? And I'm curious if, let's say that I was making a project and I'm doing a book on, I don't know, Death Valley. And I went on and I saw someone had done a book on Death Valley or something similar in the past. Is it a good thing that someone has done something similar? And does that mean that, okay, maybe there's potentially a market for my book? Or if you find something similar, is that kind of a deterrent? And maybe the person says, well, okay, this has already been done. Should I do something else? Does it work that way? Is there one better than the other?
I think that even if someone has done a book on a similar subject, it's very likely that you're doing the book in a different way. And if you are, for example, an artist or something like that, you probably have an audience that's engaged with the work that you specifically do. So finding a similar project is not a reason to scrap your idea altogether. It can be a great way to see, okay, well, this person did this and offered this type of reward. Or you can even actually grab a link to the Imaginary Death Valley project and put that into Google and see what outlets wrote about them when they ran their Kickstarter project, because that will show you which outlets linked to them. So it can be really helpful for research purposes. And that was really what I meant, was to see how other people have conveyed their project and structured it and structured rewards and priced them. It wasn't really about whether you should do the project or not.
Okay, that's awesome. That's super smart to thinking that way. And that leads me to sort of a second question, which is, let's say that I do a book and I don't quite get funded and the project doesn't sort of go through. Is there a second chance? Is there a way to basically say, okay, I didn't quite get it done the first time, but is it okay to come back with that same project or a similar project the next time?
Absolutely. We see that happen a lot, that sometimes people will launch a great project, but they won't have done enough work building up their audience in advance, or maybe they haven't included enough imagery, or just something happens in their life and they can't promote it as much as they expected. So they go away and they do some more research, do some more planning, build up their audience more and come back. And very often we'll see that project will succeed. It happens a lot on Kickstarter. So one of my favorite creators has always said a failed Kickstarter campaign is a dodged bullet, because otherwise, without that sort of testing ground, you might print 1,000 copies of your book and have them in your garage and then be like, well, I can't put my car in here now. Whereas if you get that information from the Kickstarter project, then you see, okay, something about my message is not quite resonating. I need to tweak this before I go out and publish this book.
Okay, excellent. And Meg, a question for you, and I can't remember who sent this in, but it's basically your preferred social media networks. What worked for you more than everything else?
That's a good question. It's interesting because I would say there are different networks for different audiences, for sure. But Facebook for me was my initial marketing network that I used, because it was mostly for my friends and family at first. At first, I actually was just thinking this will just be for friends and family, maybe not anyone else, or maybe a couple more people. So certainly Facebook is a little more personal. You've got people on there who specifically want to hear from you. So that's what I used initially. But actually now with my small business, I use Instagram a lot more. Instagram is just an easier way to reach people you don't know, especially with hashtags, if you really use them well, and with sort of finding a tribe of like-minded people. So especially if you're doing a children's book, finding moms and searching mom hashtags, things like that, I would recommend over Facebook, actually, if you're finding, looking for strangers, looking for new audiences.
Okay. And also, just Meg, on a technical note here, Denny wrote in and asked, how were the paintings digitized and prepared for the book? So did you photograph them or flatbed scan them?
Yes, that's a great question. I get that a lot. I used a flatbed scanner, and thankfully my paintings are small enough to do that with. They're about 12 by 12. So I just found a really high quality scanner. There are a lot of things to look for in that, and maybe we can link, send you guys a link to like some articles about that or something. But it is.
Do you remember the model you used off the top of your head?
Oh man,
don't
remember right now, but I could figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I know which things to look for. There's like, you know, you need to have a good color depth. You certainly need to know what resolution they will scan to be. And I know some of those technical things can be harder to figure out for like fine artists, but it really can be done. And mine came out looking just like the paintings.
Excellent. That's, I guess, what we're all after. So Margot, another question for you. One of the things that I was absolutely astounded by in a positive way was when I saw the slide for Hello Ruby, and the person was attempting for 10,000 and ended up with 380,747. And I was like, that is remarkable in itself. And John P. from somewhere wrote in and said, question for Margot, what can or must happen to excess funds over the initial goal? I've seen some excesses that are huge. And that was my question as well. It's like, wow, so you got overfunded. How does that work? What happens to the excess money?
Sure. Well, the original Hello Ruby project, I cannot imagine that she had budgeted to print 9,000 or 10,000 copies of the book. So a big piece of it will go into printing and shipping all the additional rewards. But if you end up with extra money left over after you've fulfilled all the costs, then that's yours to keep. And I think that having a successful creative project like that, you should be able to pay yourself, especially if you have a ton of people that want what you've made. So absolutely, that's your money to keep. You can invest it in the next project, pay yourself, whatever you want.
You know, that is a really good point. I've never really thought about that. But when you look at people, let's say publishing, turning to Kickstarter to publish, a lot of times the projects that they're doing, they may look at the traditional publishing world and say this may or may not have a home here. And so what I love about projects on Kickstarter is that many of them started as personal project ideas. And I never really thought about that, but the idea of paying yourself for doing that, because if you're going to exist as an artist, if you're going to have a sustainable relationship with your field or a career, then you've got to do that. So that's a great thing to, plus you can turn around and do another project. And Margot, that's my next question for you is, through the past, have you seen people that have one successful publishing campaign on Kickstarter, are they doing a second and a third, and is that sort of a common theme?
Run one project, come back and do more projects. And the success rate for running your second project and then your third project is even higher than the first time. So obviously the first project that you run, there's a big learning curve, as we've all heard about, but people are more likely to succeed with subsequent projects, partly because they know the ropes and partly because they've already built that audience for the first project that they can call on again for their new work.
Excellent, that makes sense. Meg, another question for you. This is from Shirley, and she said, did Meg just use the funds to cover the print and estimated postage costs?
I did use it for that, yes. Thankfully for me, I did almost everything myself. Thankfully in some ways and not in other ways. It was a lot of work. But I used it to cover, yeah, the printing and the shipping costs. And that was basically, I mean, it was just the overhead. It was just those things for me.
Okay, excellent. And so I had another question for you, Meg, which is interesting because normally when someone comes to me about publishing a book, I get one of the most common questions is, how many copies can I make? So people, I think, oftentimes come into a publishing idea or situation and they think, I'm going to print 10,000 or 20,000 or 500,000. And what was interesting about your take to me was when you went to Blurb's large order services, you said, what's the smallest order I can make at 100? And so what did that, did it change your perspective anyway when you said I could do just 100? And is that the final amount that you went with, or what was the final amount?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The reason why I was asking them about the smallest amount I could print is because I think in my head I was trying to minimize risk. You know, I was thinking I don't want to print 1,000 copies and then be in the hole, so to speak, and not be able to sell them.
Right.
So I was just thinking, what is the smallest I can go to get these out? But what ended up happening is that my Kickstarter was funded by 319%. So what I thought was going to be 100 books ended up being, I think it was 334 books. But because I had so many pre-orders and because Blurb knew I was working with Kickstarter, I was able to just email large order services after the Kickstarter and say, hey, I'm adding more book orders to this, which is fine because I had at least 100 and, I was still going to get the cost that I wanted at, 300 books. So that was my thinking on it.
That's the best case scenario when you're calling back the printer and saying, I need to order more books. So, I mean, ideally, right. Exactly what everybody is after here. That's a very cool thing. Margot had a question from someone about nonfiction books. And is there a sample off the top of your head, or how do nonfiction books do in particular? Oh, wait, I think I lost your microphone.
That I funded on Kickstarter. It's called Derby Life, a crash course in the incredible sport of roller derby. And so that worked really well. I think with nonfiction books, you really just have to think about what kind of visuals and imagery can you create for the Kickstarter site to create visual interest. Because a lot of nonfiction books are very text heavy and some of them don't have any imagery at all. So then you want to think about things like, for mine, I included a photograph of someone playing the sport and a photograph of myself playing the sport and some memorabilia I'd collected over time and other things like that to kind of give people a sense of what I was doing, but those images were not actually in the book.
Okay. We're running out of time. I got two quick questions for both of you. Meg, the first question for you is, are you going to do this again? You can say yes or no.
Or
maybe.
Have plans to do this again. Yes.
Okay,
the
good.
Funny thing is, yeah, we're at another crossroads where we might be moving again. So I may not do it immediately, but maybe it'll be my next move.
Much bigger apartment, I think, is what you need.
Right. Yeah.
And Margot, you said something at the very beginning of your presentation that I absolutely loved hearing you say. And I think, in my opinion, it's super important because photographers will come up to me. Typically, I work with a lot of photographers. They come up and ask about doing a book. And the first thing I always ask them is, do you look at other people's books and do you support other people doing books? And you said that as a Kickstarter employee, but you're also a major backer, that you backed like 400, projects. How important is that? And why is it so important?
I think it's really important. Partly, you do want to be involved in the community that you're reaching out to and that you're doing work in. And I think that if someone lands on your Kickstarter page and can see that you haven't ever backed any Kickstarter projects, they're going to wonder a little bit. But it's also really helpful to back a couple Kickstarter projects, even for just $1 or $5, so that you experience the feeling of being a backer and getting backer updates and seeing what is exciting to you and what you think works less well, so that you can be really influenced by that as you plan and run your own campaign.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this, both of you. It was wonderful. You shared so much information. For the attendees out there, just know also that we've added a couple of handouts, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner. So there are a couple of downloads. And we really appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you so much to Margot and Meg for sharing their platforms and their stories. And we've created a nice little resource for people here, and much appreciated from the Blurb side. So thank you, and we will hopefully see you both in the near future.
Thanks so much.
And bye, everyone. We'll be back with another webinar next month. And also remember that this will be archived on the Blurb YouTube channel. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you in the near future. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.